Okay, hi everybody. So I wanted to react to this post. I'm not trying to be polemical. I'm trying to be productive. Trying to discuss. It's nice when people are trying to understand Bitcoin. So it's great. So uh, hopefully this is not misinterpreted like I'm attacking Fred as a person, etc. So I want to establish immediately this right. It is not about personal things. It's mostly about idea. I have to say, this topic of scarcity is very important to me because it's not that I have anything against scarcity. In general, I don't like the idea that Bitcoin is scarce. I think there are some philosophical problem with that. But anything that allows us to understand Bitcoin is great. If scarcity played a role, then we will need to understand it and we will need to make sense of it. But every time I try to bring in scarcity or even the finite supply, so I'm not against the finite supply. Finite supply is important because it allows us to be exposed to Bitcoin without the fear of being diluted. In particular, being diluted by a third party that will dilute and then also, uh, prioritize their connections. They will, like banks do, like central banks do, or the feds do, right? They give special treatment, loans, and money to their clients. It's not something that they do even just to improve society overall. So Bitcoin is it created this fixed supply to avoid that issue, but it's different from the idea of scarcity. Uh, as a physicist, I care about data and I want to see what data says. And there is no evidence that, the supply of Bitcoin is running down. The general supply is constant, but we have, let's call it the supply that allows you to buy or sell Bitcoin, right, at any moment. That actually, if you look at the data, and we can look at the data in a moment, uh, it's pretty much constant over the last few years. It actually went up a little bit since 2023, but in the last few years, it has been pretty much constant in Bitcoin. Of course, as the price goes up, the transaction in dollars goes up. So there is as much Bitcoin as you want at any moment. That is what we want for something like Bitcoin because it needs to be liquid. If it was not liquid, banks will not be interested. Large institution will not be interested. Maybe even small investor will not be interested. You want to have the ability to sell and buy Bitcoin, and that is available. The beauty and the miracle of Bitcoin is that even with a constant volume and the constant transactions, the price continues to go up. And so it's something else. And it doesn't go linearly up, it goes non-linearly. In fact, if you look at, metrics, like for example, addresses, that is not necessarily a direct metric of users, but it's proportional to user, to the interest, to the activity. I call it activity. So I think this started when I show Fred, and he was positive about that. I found this new result. I already did something similar in the past, but I made an update, and I also made a time chart of the number of searches in Google versus the price. So price versus the number of searches. And it's a beautiful model. It matches very well. It overshoots during bull markets. Recently seems actually to underestimate the price. It could be that maybe people don't search as much as before since AI. That will be interesting thing to test. But there is a very strong correlation. And that correlation goes as price search is square, close to square, right? It's not exactly square, 1.95, but close to 2, a number close to 2. And then that is also remind us of a relationship between price and addresses because it's also close to square. Now it changes actually according to different cut. That is another thing at the show. If you take different wallets, and you focus on wallets with more than 1 Bitcoin, more than 10 Bitcoin, we have different slopes. But if you take everybody, that the relationship between price and users, it's close to square. Large wallets have a bigger impact. They grow slower in time, but they have a bigger impact. It's actually stronger than that. There are, if you go to wallets with more than 10 Bitcoin, for example, we have almost a power of 5 impact on the price. That is what you will expect from a whale. But then Fred says, he calls it, in the beginning, I was okay with this statement that it's interest, right? So we can generalize interest activity in the network, right? But then, for some reason, he went to this direction of scarcity. And it's okay, right? People can explore different things. They can look at different ideas. I knew immediately that it was going to be wrong because I tested enough this idea of scarcity. There is no evidence in the data that Bitcoin is scarce, that at least it acts, the scarcity matters in terms of price. I did many tests, like for example, you see all the time this post where they say, oh, the number of Bitcoin on exchanges is going down. Okay, but it does that correlate with price? Nobody ever shows that. I did show that, and I can show you the graph, and there is no correlation. It doesn't matter how many coins there are in exchanges. You cannot use it as a metric to predict price. It doesn't correlate with price. So after you do this for a while, you build a certain intuition where, in fact, beyond the scarcity, I would like to see one day anybody showing me, or even myself coming up with how we can introduce the fact that Bitcoin has a finite amount of coins to establish any property of Bitcoin. The only thing that it does really, it's redistributes the coin, because for every buyer, there is a seller, and for every seller, there is a buyer. So when there is a seller, somebody buys. So it's a way of redistributing the coins. That is the only thing that happens, but it doesn't affect price. But anyway, I can show you all the practical evidence because I can make up a system and they say, oh, Bitcoin behaves in this way. But then if I don't latch it, right, if I don't show that actually Bitcoin behaves in that way, then my fantasies are fantasies, right? They don't apply to reality. So we have plenty of evidence to show that Bitcoin doesn't behave in the way Fred describes it here. But, there is a problem that is more fundamental than that. The math is wrong. And I could have done the math wrong myself. So if anybody wants to correct me or sees a problem in my logic, please point it out, right? Because we are trying to figure it out. But I think there is a fatal mistake in the proof itself. And if there is a fatal mistake in the proof itself, it ends there, right? Because we don't even have to show that actually Bitcoin doesn't behave in this way. I mean, it's still interesting. I can still show you, but the argument really ends there, right? If a proof is wrong. So what is it trying to say? I don't know if you read this post, but I can walk you through. It say scarcity is quadratic. If a bear supply gets cuts in two because there is an interest, right? There is the interest goes up. People demand Bitcoin or want Bitcoin. The impact of new interest at the current rate drives price up by 4. Well, it turns out it's not true. It's only, let me say this, he tested it for only one case. And in that case, the number turns out to be kind of right. But now if you generalize, that is what we want, right? We don't just want to do it for cutting in half. We want to do it for cutting in 3 or whatever, right? So imagine there are more and more users coming and they are basically decreasing the number of Bitcoin available. Is there a formula, right? Because he's trying to establish a formula. He's trying to say, first of all, scarcity is quadratic. What do you mean? It probably means that scarcity leads to a price that is proportional to this interest square, but it's not true. Not at least not in the way that he describes it. There is no way to describe it. It doesn't have anything to do with scarcity. It's true that, yes, price is proportional to the number of users or to the interest, right? Google searches, Square, but it's a network effect. It doesn't have anything to do with scarcity. So let's see what he's trying to say, right? You can read his proof, but I want to show you instead how to generalize this proof. To first of all to verify it and then generalize. So what did they do? So first of all, let's try to understand what he's proposing. He's proposing that basically Bitcoin works like Uniswap, right? So these are kind of decentralized exchanges where they have some liquidity pool, and then so he's using this word, automated maker, market maker, right? So it's a decentralized exchange that where you can go and swap a coin for another coin. Like, I don't know, why will you want to swap unless maybe you want to buy Bitcoin, right? So you have some ETH or some USDT and you want to buy Bitcoin, right? So these will be coins that you will want to swap, right? Because you want to Bitcoin. That is the idea. So in that case, yes, you want to swap them, right? And so how do they work? They try to make it automated, right? So it works in this way where we have, so here I give you an example, right? It's not necessarily a realistic example, but it's an example of how this works. There is, it's usually some pairs, right, that you will be able to swap. So let's say USDT and BTC. So imagine this pool, it starts with 15 BTC and it has 100,000 USDT, right? Now, it turns out the way they do it, it's designed to be like that, right? So when I read his post, I didn't realize what he was trying to say, because this needs to be constant. First of all, why it needs to be constant? So one thing is what an artificial pool does. Another thing is what the overall market. But his hypothesis is the overall market works in this way. I already disagreed. Why should it work in this way? It's not designed where the markets respond to other type of dynamics. Why will you impose this thing? This is something that you will have to prove. You cannot just say, it works in this way, and then this is your assumption. It's an artificial thing, right? If it is some kind of in mathematics, often we have these artificial words, right? You say, I start with these axioms. This is my axiom. You accept the axioms, and then you want to see the consequences. Well, that doesn't work with real things in the physical world, because your axioms need to be proven on reality, right? These represent a good model of what Bitcoin is. It's not. It needs to be shown. Show me that this is the case, right? Not that this artificial exchange is using this method to exchange, and so they are trying to establish some way to price correctly these coins when you exchange them, right? And so they have a kind of a rough formula that could work, but it's mostly, it's locally, because they will have to adjust it. Like if there are market forces that push the price down and up, this needs to be adjusted, right, to that. But anyway, right now I don't even want to focus on, is this a good model of a real Bitcoin? I'm just saying, is mathematical conclusion correct? Is there a relationship between price and this demand that goes with the square, right? So in this case, the demand will be represented by user. So in his example, and you can read his example and you can follow his math, he goes all of a sudden with a 50% reduction in the supply. All right. And he arrived to a certain conclusion when he generalized it. Well, and I will try to be as nice as possible. I want to insult you, but in mathematics, you never do that. You prove it for 1, you prove it for 2, you prove it for 3, and then if you find a formula, then you generalize that formula, right? It's an induction for it. You generalize it for n, right? First, you have to prove it for 1, 2, 3, and so on. You don't go prove it for one case and then you generalize, because it doesn't work like that. You can get mistakes. You could be right for that particular case, but then it's not, you cannot jump to conclusion and generalize it. So this, I think this is what he has done. Maybe got excited. It happens, in particular, if, I don't know what to say, if you're not doing this professionally every day, he has a PhD in math, but maybe doesn't do math professionally anymore, right? He is interested in other things. But I'm not trying to insult him or anything. I'm just saying something happened there. I don't know, but I don't care. I'm still have a lot of respect for him. And let's focus on the ideas, right? Everybody can make mistakes, including me. So if I do something wrong, I mean, I'm asking Grok to help me with this, but I double check, triple check the math. I think it's correct. But tell me if there is anything wrong, okay? So the idea here is that we're following basically the same principle, right? So we have 100,000 USDT, we have 15 BTC, we get this K constant is 1.500 million, right? 1,500,000 coins. And then I ask basically to test it. They say, what happens if this person now is asking, there is a user comes and asks for 10 BTC. We want to swap for 10 BTC. And you see what happens usually, right? The logic goes like this. Let's look at an example, and then we can generalize it, right? We can do it for every person comes, right? We can look, because we're interested in a sequence, right? What happens if there is one user coming, two user coming, three user coming, and is there a way of generalize what will happen? What is the relationship between the price and the growth of users, so the growth in interest, or whatever you want to call it. So in this case, what happens, right? So y, that is basically y in this case is the number of BTC. I think he swapped these symbols. He used Y for USDT and X, but it doesn't matter, right? In our case, Y represents the number of coins of BTC. So we go down by 10, right? Because this user wants to swap 10 coins. So we are left with 5. And so to maintain this balance, basically, right, because of that formula, now we are solving for a new X, right? We have a new Y. We want to solve for the new X, but this remains constant. So it's very simple math, right? I will say, I don't know, at least middle school math, but not much more complicated than that. Now we solve for X prime, right? This prime means it's a new X, right? The new X, and we get 300,000, right? So you say, well, the pool must receive enough USDT to increase its balance from 100,000 to 300,000. So that means that basically the user needs to pay 200,000, right? Because this is the difference between what we had before at the start and what we need now. So and this basically is like a state, right? Every time somebody comes and exchanges, and I guess once we run out of BTC, we need to go back and rebalance the pool, right? Because otherwise there is nothing to exchange. And this is where I think the problem is these pools. I don't know, because I need to maybe research them better. But I think they are meant not to, to be a valid price model for many, many months or even years. They are meant to deal with things that happen on a relatively short amount of time. And, they are trying to make a model of demand, offer and demand, right? But it's valid temporarily. It's not something that it's valid over many years, many months, like, a price model of Bitcoin. That is, I think, where the problem is, right? But again, this will be a problem not in the math, but in generalizing these to saying that this is how Bitcoin works, right? But let's focus on the math and show you how the math that Fred shows us is not correct. Okay, and so this actually um, changes the price because the next person that comes, right? So initially we had 100,000 coins, sorry, USDT. We had 15 coins. So we assumed we use, and probably this balance is done. I don't know, maybe I need to research it, and maybe somebody can comment and tell me how this works. But probably every day or whatever they update this thing where it kind of matches the current price, right? Because otherwise it will not make sense. You would want to a balance pool that comes close to the balance price, to the current price. And so it's the market that establishes the price, and then these ones are updating themselves, I imagine. But okay, so again, we focus only on the math, right? Even if I'm interested why Fred felt that this could be a representation of how the price is decided overall. Like you say, it's like a giant AMM, you know. But and so the final price then it's this 300,000, that is the new USDT balance over this diminished coin. So it's like a rebalancing thing, right? The value in USDT went up, the value of BTC went down, and now this means that is this, right? That this the price of one BTC. Okay, so by this strong demand, right? Because it's a huge component, right? We went from 15 Bitcoin to only 5, so this was a really big pressure in demand and push the price up. Okay, so this is what the price the user paid for the 10 BTC, and this is the final price, right? Okay, so we can see how basically it works, right? It's trying to recalculate a price based on this demand, right? On how depleted these, and this is an extreme case because we started with relatively few coins and we depleted most of them. I'm assuming in these pools there are much bigger pools, so it's difficult to take out almost 2/3 of the entire pool. But it's an extreme case. Now, what I did, I tried instead of understanding what will happen if there is a sequence of users. Okay, and I started with a relatively large pool. Now we can make this pool even bigger. But let's say we start with 100 BTC, then we have people coming, and each of them in sequence ask for one BTC, right? So I'm trying to model what will happen if the demand increases, there are more and more people coming, and they're asking for one BTC each, right? It doesn't matter, you can make it random or whatever, right? But in this case, everybody wants one BTC. And I'm just trying to establish some kind of relationship between the demand and price if Bitcoin worked in this way. So we can go through the sequence, but basically, it's basically what we did before, right? We subtract one coin. This is the new number of coins. So this quantity needs to stay constant. We recalculate what X is. We solve for X, right? All the steps. And you can see that little by little, right? So this is the new price, blah, 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 and it goes up, right? And so, and it's this continuous. We recalculate, right? As there is more and more demand, and you can see the price goes up, right? It does goes up, and okay, so it continues to go up as more and more people go through. And you can try to do the same. Ask ChatGPT or Grok to guide you through this calculation. And this is the sequence that we have. The price goes up indeed. Does it go up with the square? No, it doesn't, because if you generalize these, you can see that every time, right, basically we subtract these. We started with this constant, and this is the number of users. You can solve for X. Remember, here is the opposite of what he has. Is basically USDT and Y, but it doesn't matter. So this what happened after N. So if you want to generalize, right, according to this formula, you get this, right? It's basically this is what the X is. You just substitute this. This is what you have for Y. This substitute that, and you get this formula. Okay, this is the formula that you get once you do the algebra. It's not what he gets. It's not a power law. In fact, if you draw it in a log-log graph, it's not a straight line. It goes up very quickly because this is almost, it's something almost similar to an exponential. It goes up very quickly, and it's not a power law. It's not a power law at all. Now, why did he get the result? Because, and this is something that I check with also with Grok, if you do it for that special case of 50%, then the same thing that this formula tells us, you get a result similar to what this formula is, but only for that case. If you generalize to all the other cases, it doesn't hold. So it is not true. So he made a mistake mathematically. It doesn't lead to that. And then, so besides being wrong mathematically, because we don't get the same equation that he gets. These are just constant, right? This was the K, and this is basically how many coins are left, right? So that he says it's 2 million. You can actually calculate for his case using these numbers, and you will see it doesn't work the way it says it works. So it's a mathematical mistake. It didn't do what mathematicians do when they try to find a pattern, a mathematical pattern that is, let's try for 1, let's try for 2, then, you could try n, right? Substitute n like we are doing here, or n plus 1, and see if it also works, and then you generalize. But he tried it for one case, and then he saw some kind of a pattern there, and then he said, oh, I found a pattern. No, you don't find the pattern with just one number. You need to use many cases, and then you can generalize. And you can see, you can try to do this manually, or ask Grok to do this calculation step by step, and then see if this formula catches this sequence. It does. So it's a correct sequence. Or unless I did some mistake, and please let me know if I made a mistake. But it seems that he has done a mistake. And this is without discussing, everything else that I actually mentioned. In fact, I can show you that in my slides, because maybe you guys are interested in that. Okay, it's actually, let me show you these, because now I'm switching to these. Do we have any evidence at all that actually Bitcoin behaves in this way? That is kind of a separate issue, but I think it's still interesting. And given we're discussing this, I want to discuss it myself. So first of all, before I do anything else, this is the graph that I get. If I follow that formula, it's not a power law. I'm plotting in a log-log graph, so no power law. But let me show you all the other information. Okay. Here. Okay, so this is his proof. But we say it's wrong, but let me show you this. So these are the transactions, right? These are looking at the last 5 years of Bitcoin transactions. You can see, and these are in Bitcoin. These are hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin exchanges every day. And it's a reservoir. It's almost like it's not impacted at all by all the things that are happening outside. This has been like, if you look at this, if you go back, of course, initially the transaction started to grow. In fact, actually, there was this one was one of my first power laws that I found. It was a power law between price and transactions. So they actually grew in time as price was growing. And eventually, not in USDT, right? Because it will not make any sense compared with USD. Of course, if you calculate in USDT, the price goes up, the transaction also goes up. But in Bitcoin, initially they grew, but now, since many years, they are flat. And this needs to be understood. I would like to understand how come. Now, it's possible that this is what exchanges do, right? They create a lot of volume. They have all these market makers that are selling and buying, selling and buying. But this is part of the coins that are there. It doesn't matter even if they are selling it to each other. It's still, you can come in. It's like the sea, right? You can decide to buy thousands of Bitcoin. Given the volume is hundreds of thousands, you can buy them. It's fair available. And you can see there have been evidence recently of I don't know if you notice, when Saylor announces that he bought all these coins, there have been times where the market didn't move at all, right? And sometimes you do see some movement. You can say that maybe associated with this activity, maybe ETF activity, but what comes first, right? I mean, do they buy because the price is going up and they want to join, or do they push the price? There is nothing similar to what he describes. It doesn't act, the market doesn't act as an AMM, the physical evidence, because even if I make this, even if his calculation were correct, but are not, at least this is what I think, right? Double check everything, let me know. The physical evidence doesn't support this case. Sorry for that. And then actually, they started to go a little bit up, right? They went up a little bit, but because there is a lot of variability, maybe this is when the ETFs came in and they created more volatility, or Saylor, they create a lot of volatility, that is interesting. But you can see in general, since here, in average, they are constant, right? So in BTC, and remember what happens, right? He's saying that BTC are going down. There are less BTC available, right? This is what he's claiming. As more people come in, there are less BTC available. Not true. No evidence for that. So we need to focus on data. We need to understand. If we want to understand Bitcoin, we can. I know many people love this idea of scarcity because they think they understand it. They believe it. They understand it. Believe me, many people don't understand scarcity, but they are attached to this idea because it's rare. Almost like a Gollum. Oh, my little precious is rare. It doesn't matter because Litecoin is rare. While Litecoin is not $100,000, it's also rare. It's just a little bit more. It's a little bit more than Bitcoin, but it doesn't matter, right? It's also scarce. It doesn't matter what is a number. If a number is fixed, it's scarce, right? Because it can be a huge, big number. What matters is finite, right? That it doesn't increase, not the number itself, right? So, yeah, it's something else. Bitcoin has these network properties that are amazing, and people. My concept, my entire teaching is about, supported by the data, is that people are joining this network, and the network is becoming stronger and stronger, more valid, more valuable, and that is much better than scarcity. People think that scarcity kind of guarantees the price to go up because it's scarce. You confuse people. This is why I know, this Cathy recently, right, that was talking about her teeth, or that lady with the pizza. I know that if you understand it from a Maxi point of view, you immediately see what the problem is when they make these statements, and you can attack it from that angle. But you also have to understand that if we want to orange peel more people, these are concerns that they have because there is some kind of disconnect. There is a deep disconnect there. If you throw them scarcity, they will never understand it. It's not really what I'm writing an article, by the way. I already posted these triads, what I think the value of Bitcoin comes from. And scarcity is now there, at least not directly. It's, if you want to associate scarcity with finiteness, it's in the ledger that you need to have a finite, a fixed ledger to make it a perfect ledger. That is one of the three components of a triad. But per se, scarcity doesn't push the price up. I never saw anybody. This is why I was so interested in what Fred was saying, because if it's true, it's true, right? Then we will have to accept what Bitcoin does. But you can see here, the amount of Bitcoin available is there. So we are not running out of Bitcoin. It's constant. You can buy how many Bitcoin you want at any time. And here is zoom out of the same picture. You can see that initially actually was growing up, right? So how do you explain growing transactions? So more and more Bitcoin being available, they're not running out, and the price still going up. And then the price going up and kind of being flat here, then flat here. We are not running out of Bitcoin. It's a so ridiculous statement. We are not running out of Bitcoin. And the other thing, and this is from this graph comes from this continuous statement. There is this other analyst, and again, please don't take it as an attack on the rational root. I like his beautiful Bitcoin clock. I adapted it. I add the power law, and I try to improve it in that way. I always give him credit, but he has these graphs where he's trying to show that this quantity, calls it available supply, that for most history of Bitcoin, it went actually up. It was increasing, and the price was increasing. And then he says there is a point where actually is decreasing now. And it's an arbitrary quantity anyway, because you have to define what is available supply. It depends on how long people hold, how much you have to hold. Something like, you're long-term holder if you don't sell more than 25% of your Bitcoin over a period of 4 years. You can come up with all kind of definition for a long-term holder, and then you'll say, that coins are not available. Not true, because there are a lot of data showing the long-term holder, they can sell their coin at any moment. Now, there are studies that show that even the holding time is a power law, and is one of the things that I want to study at a certain point, how we can use that information, maybe to derive more interesting property of Bitcoin. It's a long-term project. But in general, there are graphs where they show that, I probably have seen this graph. When we reach peaks, the first one to sell are the long-term holder. So the fact that somebody held for 10 years, it doesn't mean that they cannot sell tomorrow. You call it an available supply, because available supply basically is the total supply minus these supposed long-term holdings. But with the long-term holdings, they can become available at any time. But even if you take it at face value, right, this exactly like I did with Fred, say, okay, let's assume that you're right, then you get the math wrong. In this case, I'm assuming this guy is right, that available supply is a relevant quantity, and I show the price of Bitcoin, and there is no correlation. The correlation is 0.03. That means basically no correlation. You can see it's flat, right? There is no correlation. So it doesn't matter how much available supply there is. It doesn't affect price. Price doesn't react to that. So, and this is actually after available supply grew, supposedly now it's decreasing. You see, in fact, you see how it's decreasing. The graph goes from from right to left, right? And it seems there is like a little bit of a direction, but it's more an illusion than anything else, because the calculation says that, it doesn't correlate. Now, could it be correlating later on in time? We don't know, but right now it doesn't. It doesn't affect price at all. It's basically flat. So, these are the data. The data are the data. So, and this is actually a post of one of my followers that says, I don't think scarcity per se give us value. Is because instead, it's commenting my comment where I say basically because it is a more useful network. And it became its value. Actually is a much more powerful statement. Is that scarcity or fixed supply, it's one of the value proposition. People are attracted to Bitcoin because they know they are not diluted, right? But it's difficult to quantify that. How do you quantify that? It's just one of the many things that makes Bitcoin interesting. But there is no one single piece of information where you can measure a quantity that is supposed to decrease, like the amount of Bitcoin on exchanges or whatever, that actually um, can be used to determine what happens to price. So scarcity doesn't apply. This is one of the problems that I had with S2F, because you can look at, I've posted many graphs whenever, and now the S2F is dying, right? Because we are not doing what Plan B says we are doing, but we are supposed to be already 500,000, and that was actually the corrected model. We actually supposed to be $1 million, whatever. But everybody's becoming, a lot of people at least are becoming disenchanted with that model. And I repeated so many times when I was plotting, the rewards, how many coins were produced at any particular time versus the price of Bitcoin, there was no correlation. So it was an illusion, and I have videos about that. I explained so many times. So I look for many, many, many times anything that represents scarcity from a data point of view, not just a general idea, concept, and the price of Bitcoin. And there is none. And even this theoretical calculation makes absolutely no sense. I, hopefully follow my, you can pause the video, you can ask Grok, to follow my steps and see if you get my same result. You don't get a power law from that. And we know that there is a power law between interest. So that part is right, interest and price. But it's a network effect. And I gave a proof. All what you need for that proof. And if you're interested, maybe we can conclude there. And then if there are any questions, I'm still working because the next thing I want to do is to study the different levels, right? So different holding. What is the effect of whales? Can I prove actually the observation that I have with different wallets contribute in different ways? At the same time, in the end, they all give you the same result, right? That is crazy because basically it goes like this. The large wallets grow slowly, but we have a big impact. The small wallet, they grow fast, but we have a small impact. If you look at the combined effect, it's always that 5.8 power law in time. That is incredible. Everybody, that is scale invariance at its best. Different effects at different levels, they all combine to give us one single effect. But I want to see if I can prove it mathematically. But I do have a proof of how to get something that looks like a power law from kind of a simple arguments. I don't know if you saw this proof, but we can go together. Basically says, that it's kind of like a generalization of Metcalfe, but more in spirit than in the details, right? Metcalfe basically say it's all about the nodes. I think it's the nodes, but Metcalfe is a very special result where basically everybody's connected to everybody else. The problem with that, then you will have to say, well, how being connected, and we are connected because the fact that you are watching this video on Saturday night, it's 11 p.m. here, it means that there is some network, right? People follow influencers, they talk with each other, we discuss Bitcoin all the time, and the price, including the price. And so it's the price discovery and what we think the network is worth it's due to our interactions by discussing, interacting. It's an indirect thing, more of us there are, and more possibility to exchange. participate, etc. So this pushes the price up. But you can try to formalize and say, right, that the value of a network is proportional to the user somehow, and in particular to what? To their activity, to the fact that there is some level of activity. Now, what is that activity? Fred called it interest. You can call it interest. It could be wanting to buy Bitcoin, watching some video about Bitcoin, because all these things eventually lead to some action, right? Maybe you already bought enough Bitcoin, but now you're going to DCA because your convictions goes up, right? You see the price going up. There is some, I call them feedback loop. I prefer this language than reflectivity, right? That is something that some more macroeconomic people use. I like the language of networks, so I use feedback loops. It's more a physics idea, but it's basically the same thing. And so it makes sense, right? More people engage, more people interacting. The interesting thing that these interactions are non-linear, because in network, basically three, and they show you, right? One can think that 2 plus 2 equal 4, but also 2 times 2 equal 4, right? So you don't show a linear property. See why it's important to test math in many examples, because in this case, you will say, well, sum and multiplication are the same, right? 2 plus 2 equal 4, 2 times 2 equal 4. I'll try to generalize. 3 plus 3 is 6. 3 times 3 is 9, right? So it's not true that they're the same. This is why you needed to test it, going back to Fred's proof. But there are non-linear effects, where 3 times 3 is different from 3 plus 3. You get much more by multiplying than adding. And networks are all about multiplying instead of adding. But here we are saying that the value of Bitcoin is proportional to all this activity, that everything from conferences, right, going on, to videos appearing, to people orange peeling, to actually directly buying, DCAing, or entering the new network as a new person, a new user. And so we call it phi. This Greek symbol is called phi. So, and we are interested to see what happens, is what I tried to show, when one more person comes in, like I did before, right? I was adding one person at a time, and I was studying the effect of doing that by adding one person. What will happen next, right? So it's basically going to be the effect, the change in activity by one person coming in, by a new user coming in, is whatever we had before plus the activity of this person, right? Of a change in the network. So, so these are the new interactions created by this additional user. So how valuable, how much contribution this new user can do relatively to the entire network, right? And the idea is that all what you have to do, all these assumptions, right? And I know these are theoretical assumptions, so you can push back and say, well, are you sure about this? At least they don't contradict the evidence, right? It doesn't go against the evidence. Now, if we can find the evidence for that, it will be great. But at least these are simple, straightforward assumption, and they don't contradict the data, right? And we are saying, well, not all the users will be useful, or same level of usefulness. There comes a new whale. That whale will have a big impact. Comes a new, very active person, charismatic person that can bring in a lot of new user because of his. Starts to make a lot of video about Bitcoin, and people watch this Bitcoin, or maybe reinforce, because users here, it doesn't have to be necessarily a new user. It could be new activity by the same user. So it's basically new activity that is happening all the time. And so we are saying there is some kind of probability. There is some kind of a number. Imagine this number to be between 0 and 1, where 1, this person is super active, and 0, doesn't do almost anything. He buys few sats, and then it sits there forever. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't stack. It doesn't do anything. So it's going to be some kind of a number, right? And then basically we can write that the change, right, is in math and physics, we use this, what is called a differential, right? We say the change in this quantity relatively to the total number of the users, is going to be this, right? It's going to be proportional to the activity that is already there, right? If we have a lot of us, the change will be proportional to these activities that is already there. More there are, bigger the change, right? But next, the next important assumption, this is where you can push back and say, "Oh, I don't like these." It's an arbitrary assumption, but it's a reasonable one. Why? Because basically, I'm saying that there is some kind of constant. This is where, okay, eventually maybe we can do some more research and try to find y, for example, is 2. So this gamma have to be a square, right? Because eventually we want to show that it's square, right? For if we include everybody. Gamma is this exponent. It will turn out to be the exponent of the power law. But right now we just write it as gamma because it can be any number. We are just saying it can be any number, this activity, this probability that he's an active user, but the essential component is this: it's inversely proportional to how many of us are there. It's almost like saying, I want to find a tall person, a very active person. Probably it's more applicable to active person, but some quality, that I'm looking through a large number of sets. So the probability that I'm finding somebody with this is going to be inversely proportional to how many of us there are, because it's a large quantity. I have to look for. It's more diffuse, right? It's proportionally remember, this is proportional, right? It's going to be more and more difficult to find in this large population this active person, and in fact, there is a name for this distribution. It's called Zipf distribution. It applies to wealth. It applies to how many people are engaged in social network. Like, for example, have you ever been in some kind of a club and there are 1,000 people in that club or 100 people in that club, school club or whatever it is, and then you go to the meetings and only 5 people show up? Because it turns out that there are very few people that are very active. So if you made it a graph of, in the x-axis, you have how active that person is. Okay, so again, it could be any number between 0 and 1, or any number, right? Or 0 and 100, and then how many people associated with level of activity. It will look, in a log graph, it looks like a straight line going down, because you will have a lot of people that almost do nothing at all, and then you will have a small number of people that do almost everything. It's like that in ants societies. Ants group. You can see the number of posts that people do, how many users, how many followers people have on the internet. It's something that happens over and over again. There is a name for it. It's called Zipf law. You can find it in the frequency of words used, right? We use a lot of the word "the" in English, right? And so it's going to have a lot of frequency, right? There is a lot of usage for that word. And then there are words that we never use, right? You can organize them in like that, and they follow that. So it's not a crazy assumption. And I'm saying the level of participation of this person will be inversely proportional to how many of us there are. And then you substitute these, you're going to get this equation, right? The change of activity, it's proportional to this gamma over n times the activity. So basically, we are saying this is very cool because it applies to all the property of Bitcoin: the price, adoption. In this case, we are trying to show the effect of adoption home price. This is what we are trying to do, but also how adoption grows. You can actually apply this equation over and over to all the property of Bitcoin, but basically says that on one end, we are getting better and better. This is why we are growing, right, in terms of users and the price, etc. Because the change is proportional to how many of us are already there. More there are, more we can orange peel, for example, right? We can orange peel more people, or in this case, more of us. We can create more and more activity, and that is going to affect the price. But not all of us have the same effect, and in fact, it's kind of diffusing, and there is like some kind of a braking mechanism. This constant overhang where it becomes less and less efficient as we became bigger. So these two think balances, and so we can still growing, but there are these diminishing returns. The diminishing returns come here. If it was not this effect, guess what? The solution, because basically you need to solve this called a differential equation. We want to solve this equation. We want to find a way of, we want to generalize this. We want to find that phi and write an equation that describe how phi grows as the number of users, right? So that will be the activity that is proportional to price. Basically, how price grows as more and more people join in the network. And if it was not that 1 over n, guess what? The solution will be an exponential. So we will grow up, the price will grow up exponentially with the number of users. But because of that 1 over n, when you solve it by, if you know some calculus, but don't worry about it. I was told by a professor one way of solving a differential equation is to guess the solution. I thought, that is crazy. But if you have enough experience, you can guess that forms leads to basically to this, that the solution, it's a power law. If you substitute there, you can see that left and right sides are the same. We don't have to go through the details, okay? For the people with no calculus, you can look at the next step and you can see I integrate both sides. I get this, I get that. And if you take then the exponential of both sides, you get this, right? It is a power law. So basically, and then we know that because of that was our assumption that the price is proportional to this activity. There will be some constant, that what this proportion means, that up to some constant. But what we wanted to demonstrate is that price, so in this case I use V because the general value, right? The value of a network is proportional to the number of users to some power. In this case, empirically, that power is 2, close to 2, okay? It depends on with wallets, etc., and also time, right? It kind of slightly change over time. But yeah, so I use network property. Really, the biggest assumption is this one, that is a very, very reasonable assumption, basically, that there is some kind of a zip flow that is basically this. We don't get out of human nature or ant nature of it. There are some people that are very active and other people that are not very active, right? I'm just saying, assume that there's a very general property of these systems, and then you get the power law, So that is my proof. Now, why we get 2 versus something else, well, we will have to go deeper and find out, right? That is one of the things that sometimes I don't sleep at night. Why this value versus another value? But in general, we can show that you will expect some kind of non-linear effect. So this shows that interactions in the network can create the type of non-linear relationship between users and square. And this is very unique to Bitcoin because Google, Gold, etc., they don't have these qualities. They don't have these non-linear properties. And it's cool because what does it mean? It means that, if we double the number of us, we don't get 2 times the price. We get 4 times the price. If we triple, we get 9 times the price. If we go 10 times, right? So the price now it's 100 times. So we don't need to orange peel the entire world to actually get to 100 per. We just need to go 10 times. That is much easier. So there are a lot of beautiful consequences, and this is why I would like you to continue to explore these things and understand them. Okay. Anyway, let's see if there is any question at all. All right. Yes, it actually. So this goat is asking, is Bitcoin still follow power law? Yes, we have posted many things. In fact, if anything, it follows too well. The problem is that we are sticking to that power law, the middle one, right, the reference one, and we are supposed to be in a bull run. So we are supposed to actually leave a power law. This is when the time when we usually leave a power law and we grow faster. It's actually almost a test of a power law because we go exponential, and then we correct. We are not seeing that yet, right? I will not say that the cycle is broken, but we don't see that behavior yet. We started to see it in November. It looked everything fine, like if we were going exactly like we are going very fast up, and then there was that correction. The tariff mess up things, but if anything, we are following the power law. One of the way we know also can calculate what is called the R square, that tell us how strong the correlation is between price and time in the power law model, and that number is going up instead of going down. Okay, so I will avoid that. Some of you are making some comments about Fred. I respect Fred, independently of agreeing or not agreeing with the things he says, but yeah, let's avoid personal comments. And that beside Dario, it is a friend of mine. This is why he says I am number one. It's nice to have friends. But yeah, okay. So I go through the beauty of having things like Grok, etc. Actually, I learned something. I didn't know how these swap markets worked. But so just to summarize, I think he made a mistake in not generalizing, right? He should have, usually it's something that we do in math all the time, or whenever we are trying to prove something, we start with 1, then we go to 2, 3, then you generalize to n, or n plus 1, and then you say, okay, it seems that there is a formula that describes this sequence, and they show what the formula is. I think it's correct, but double check. But it doesn't lead to a power law. It's more like, looks almost like exponential growth, right? It's not exactly exponential, but basically you're going very, very fast up. And you don't get it. And my suspicion is that, and it's something that I want to explore. So if somebody knows more of the technical details, I think they update, this balance on a regular basis. Maybe there is some other algorithm, because they have to anyway replenish, right, every time they run out of coins. And also I think they are so large, these pools, that the price changes a bit, but mostly to keep in account demand. But I don't think it's a good model for how the market, the general market of Bitcoin works. And so there are 2 problems. One, you don't get the results he claims he gets. The math is wrong, but also it's not a good model for how Bitcoin works, because the data shows it doesn't work like that, right? If it worked like that, we should see a decrease in the number of Bitcoin available, like, for example, the transactions, but it's stable, so it's not a good model. Anyway, I hope this was interesting and useful. And unless there are further questions, I'm going to end the stream. Thank you so much to spend the evening or your morning, whatever it is, with me and listen to stuff. Bye, guys. See you soon.